Good evening. You're watching or listening to Redwood Wonk. My name is Eric Kirk. Aaron Donaldson is sitting in for Dave this week. We've got several topics we want to get right into. What we will not be talking, but we'll probably be talking about over the next few weeks is all of the developments in the January 6th committee and all the Mark Meadows emails, which all got released. Fascinating. We also won't be discussing the email dump of Elon Musk or its relevance because man was that underwhelming. But anyway, we are going to talk today about Sinema, about Griner, and about inflation. And let's start with Kirsten Sinema. Kirsten Sinema, of course, has been part of the pair that a number of people, including myself, have been affectionately referring to as Cinemansion. Basically, they were the quote-unquote moderates that got in the way of just about everything the Democrats have wanted to do since Biden came to office. They sensed power. I don't know if they got what they wanted, but they exacted it. They greatly reduced Build Back Better, even misnamed it the Inflationary Reduction Act. Really doesn't have much to do with inflation at all. But they were in the way blocking. Nobody even really knew what they wanted most of the time, but they just blocked. Were there other moderates who might have not gone along with them if those two weren't taking a stand? Who knows? I've heard that claim. But Kirsten Sinema, who years ago was a Green Party activist, and has got herself elected to the Senate in Arizona. Arizona is a very interesting place. It's become a battleground state. Right now, it has, well, pardon me, until last week, it had two Democratic senators. Now it has, now Sinema has decided she's not going to be a Republican and she'll continue to caucus with the Democrats. So she is independent. We'll talk a little bit about why I think she has done this. I think it is actually strategic, but it won't make a huge difference in how it's going, in how business is conducted. She will continue to caucus with the Democrats for now, just as Bernie Sanders does as an independent in Vermont, and Senator King in Maine. They are both independents who caucus as Democrats, and it's just a question of how you're registered. A lot of it is kind of performative theater. And the rest, but it's not like, they'll say, well, maybe she won't vote with them all the time. Well, she didn't vote with them all the time this time around. So she has been involved in some interesting bipartisan efforts. I think there's a couple of possibilities, and Aaron, I'm going to let you in here. But there is the strategy that maybe she's trying to avoid a Democratic primary she thought she would lose, and maybe even can keep the National Democratic Party from supporting her potential opponent in the Democratic primary, because splitting the vote might hurt Democrats' chance of maintaining that seat. We'll see. I don't know whose votes she would get at this point. And another is that she doesn't intend to run at all, but wants to be a lobbyist, and this is how she feels like she can position herself. Aaron, what have you got to say on the matter?
Well, electorally, I think it makes very little sense for her. The odds of her facing a primary challenge, I think, are pretty high. Her popularity is abysmal, and she's had a pretty rough year. There have not been very many moments where she has made the news in ways that are going to lead her constituents in Arizona to really rally behind her if she wants to try to split the ticket. And I think that what we saw in this most recent round of midterms is that there's this kind of lurking political party called, like, just defeat the Republicans. And it's bigger. It's a bigger coalition than we expected. There seem to be more Republicans that are willing to go to the polls right now and break with the down ballot Republican voting when it comes to really extreme candidates. And I think depending on what the Arizona Senate race shakes out to look like, that might create a world where Sinema, running independent against someone on the left doesn't really create the same threat that it would have historically. Because I don't know very many Cinemaniacs, if I can throw that one into the universe. There's just not a lot of big fans of hers that are going to, like, ride or die with her. There's no Bernie or bust constituency for Sinema as an independent. And so I do think that she could pull votes. I do think that it's a very, very close and important Senate race. So I understand why everyone's worried. But I think that if Arizona Republicans continue to field the candidates that we're seeing winning their primaries, that whoever it is that would challenge her would not really face that much of an uphill battle. I'd also point out that I do think it's frustrating because she was elected as a Democrat. The Democratic Party did a lot of work to get her elected. She's obviously still caucusing with them. She's serving on the committees that they're appointing her to. Like issue wise, she's a pretty lousy Democrat, but she's definitely a Democrat. And
Yeah.
I think that, as you say, when a lot of people call this performative, I have to agree. I don't really see the strategy here. Bernie Sanders becoming a Democrat to run for president, that made some sense. There's no way he's going to be nominated by the Democrats, but it made sense for him to try. Her breaking from the Democrats now, to me, you mentioned lobbying, that seems plausible. It seems like kind of she's building a bipartisan image that could go a lot of places, but I don't know if it's a seat in the Senate from Arizona.
Yeah, and I think if she was to run as an independent, and her Democratic challenger was going to be Ruben Gallego,
Right,
very progressive and very charismatic guy, and was basically trouncing her in the polls.
right.
That had to be on her mind, and so she's got a couple of things that can happen if she actually runs as an independent. Um, she will. There's no way the Democrats aren't going to put somebody up. There's just no way. They're not going to. They're going to put somebody up. And so one of two things can happen is that she gets about 10% of the vote and causes the Democrat to lose. Again, I'm not absolutely certain. She could actually draw more from the Republican side than the Democratic at this point. I think, and maybe draw centrists with her and all the rest. But and whom that will help, I don't know. But the other issue is that the other possible outcome is that she is runs and is not able to affect the race, in which case she's even seen as less effective. Both of those would really kill her ability to be a lobbyist. Because I mean, not kill, but it would lessen. She wouldn't be as coveted. They want her to leave, and she wants to. If she wants to get a good gig as a lobbyist, she wants to be leaving in a position of perceived power. And boy, she's had that.
She has had that perceived power, and I think that she's striking a particular note as a brand, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like as an independent, she's saying that she's shunning the kind of bitter bipartisanship,
Right.
just wants to talk issues and stick to the issues. And when you look at her voting record, the place that she breaks with the Democrats is like with the Green New Deal and with like corporate tax loopholes and things and not supporting a $15 minimum wage. I feel like you could get pretty cushy jobs trying to be a so-called moderate and working for those kinds of interests and bemoaning, the kind of both sides politics that leads to, raises in the capital gains tax that are necessary. Like, I think she's really good at lamenting how, politics as usual breaks down. She situated herself as a bipartisan person who can try to get things like the infrastructure bill passed. I agree with you. There was just too many things given up there, but she was situated as someone that was working that deal. So I don't know that she's going to leave in a position of like real power, but I think her brand is a strong one. And I think it's interesting you say that she could pull from the Republicans because I don't know that I'd seen or heard that note. And I think that that's true. I think that the defeat Trump party, like I said, is bigger than we think. And they're not really like candidate particular, but what that means is the math about how a third party candidate potentially upsets Arizona changes a little bit.
Yeah, and the thing is, so is that what is going to limit her ability to lobby is the fact that she's burned a lot of bridges. I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't even just that she was refusing to vote with the Democrats, but how she handled it.
Right.
She was not talking to anybody, ducking the media, everybody had to be cornered in a elevator, and and while all this stuff is going on, showing up to fundraisers, we're at some resort area and the rest. I mean, it was just like she didn't want to have a conversation with anybody. Manchin was at least trying to, make his case with the public and with the
Scouting off the back
Democrats.
of his boat at a bunch of kayaking protesters, right?
Well, yeah, I mean, right. I mean, it had that, but it's so but she just, I mean, she wasn't talking to anybody. She was just, no, I want it this way, and what she wasn't. We're trying to work out any. I mean, supposedly she's great at brokering these deals, but she wasn't trying to work out. Okay, this is what I'll accept. She wouldn't come out and be clearly as to what she would vote for. She just says, no, I'm not voting for that, and she,
Right.
really did stymie the Democratic Party. I mean, who knows if the Democratic Party would be in a much better situation right now, because who knows if the country would be in a better situation right now if some of this stuff had passed. I mean, it's just, now, would it have aggravated inflation? I don't know. It was spending that was to be spread out over 10 years, but there was, going to be, a daycare, pre-kindergarten schooling, preschooling. I mean, all kinds of really interesting things. And yes, a federal $15 minimum wage, which probably wouldn't have helped inflation, but in the long run, it would have been good for the economy overall if people can actually buy the goods that they're making. That's always a problem in capitalism: is, are the people who make the goods actually able to afford buying what they make? That is the perpetual crisis of the declining rate of profit. The one thing I think Marx got right, it was just I mean, so, but she just didn't engage, and that, I think, just enraged a lot of people. And especially, you'll note that she made this announcement 2 days after Warnock won. Maybe
Right.
she wouldn't have done it if it was still 50-50 and she still had that. And, while before we lose total track of time, we should talk a little bit about Manchin too. I don't think he's going to do this, not if he intends to run again, because first of all, he needs the Democrats. He needs to be able to win that Democratic race. He can't become a Republican because he couldn't win the Republican primary. He actually is less conservative than they are, and he has taken positions on issues that are actually kind of different. The Republicans are also feeling like he burned them right now, because he actually did, after saying he wasn't going to vote for any of it, obviously got lobbied himself, and came back and passed something. It was a shadow of what it was going to be, but he did pass some materials that are actually going to help move towards addressing climate change, including infrastructure we've discussed on this show. So and running as an independent, he needs every non-hardcore Republican vote he can get. He can't afford to do that. It's not Arizona. Arizona's a different place. The Republicans are just running crazies right now. Whereas we're in West Virginia, they're just running solid conservatives as opposed to crazy people.
The Republicans are celebrating the death of the McCain machine, and Sinema is apparently inheriting the mantle of being the maverick in Arizona there. I do think like this independent vibe and brand has a much stronger history in Arizona than West Virginia. I think the electoral politics, as you say, are very, very different there. Just in terms of what happens if he were to come out and how it affects the Democrats in terms of a particular state that they're fighting for. So I do think that it's substantially different. And the last thing that I'd like to say on Sinema is that I think that part of her lamenting the bipartisan rancor is a little disingenuous, because as a candidate, and as you noted, historically, as a former progressive, she should understand why all of the issues that you listed are important to her constituents. It's not like when she came down and said that we don't need higher tax rates on CEOs and corporations and things. That is in many ways aggravating for liberals, and we get really upset about that because we think that rich people should pay their share in things. But when she comes down against the $15 minimum wage, when she comes down against things like childcare, when she comes down against things like the Green New Deal, these are all things that constituents that supported her through her career, I think, value very, very deeply. And for her to, make those choices and then lament the kind of what she would call as rancor and what I would call as like constituent accountability. That's a little disingenuous. It's not like she is making tough decisions on a whole lot of like diverse issues. Her record is spotty in places that really, really matter to her constituents, and I think that's why she's getting that kind of response.
Yeah, I agree too. And again, how she handled it, I think she made big mistake.
Picking bad issues and handling it very poorly in the public in terms of explaining what she's doing and how she's trying to accomplish her goals, for sure.
Yeah, I mean, it's at any rate, we'll see, but everything reads to me like she's not planning to run in 2 years. I think again, Gallego's a really strong candidate, and Democrats came out very well in Arizona this time around. I mean, they came out. Granted, the Republican candidates were off the wall, and Carrie Lake is still trying to pull a Trump and sue. And her attorneys are already getting sanctioned for having made misrepresentations. It's just you got the crazy, and I think there is a strong current in Arizona that says we're tired of the crazy, and the Democrats are not acting crazy at the moment in Arizona. So
not crazy enough.
Not crazy enough.
I, Richard Billhouse Nixon, do solemnly swear.
I, Gerald R. Ford, do solemnly swear.
I, Jimmy Carter, do solemnly swear.
I, Ronald Reagan, do solemnly swear.
I, George Herbert Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, William Jefferson Clinton, do solemnly swear.
I, George Walker Bush, do solemnly swear.
I, Barack Hussein Obama, do solemnly swear.
I, Donald John Trump, do solemnly swear.
I, Joseph Robinette Biden Jr., do solemnly swear. So help me God.
All right, the next section is Brittany Griner. Here she was a basketball player who was trying to get into Russia a few months ago. Probably picked absolutely the worst time politically to make a mistake, apparently, and she had some cannabis materials with her and was sentenced to, I think it was 9 years in a labor camp or something like that. Something that, if it was probably a less political time, probably could have gotten off with a fine, even with Russia. Who knows? But it was just, but this was time of political hostages, and they were not letting her go. And so there was a lot of pressure on the Biden administration from her family, from the Black community, from the LGBTQ community, and from the sports community to do something about this. She is a celebrity. And of course, a lot of the people on the right end of the scale were saying, yeah, but she doesn't respect America. She should just stay there anyway. She kneeled back during the Black Lives Matter protests, during the pledge. She does not fit into their, idea of a wholesome person, at least in terms of politics, and some would argue for several other reasons. Very much. Anyways, we also have Paul Whelan, who's been in there also on what are probably trumped up charges for a few years longer. They were trying to get both of them released for the merchant in exchange for the merchant of death, as he's become known, arms dealer Bout, who has has been in jail for, I think, over 12 years now, serving a 25-year sentence. The trade was him for her. A lot of people, particularly in the right wing, were saying, well, you should have gotten Whelan instead. And what the Biden administration was trying to make clear, this wasn't a choice. This was an opportunity to get an innocent soul out of there, and we took it. And we're going to work on other ways to get Paul Whelan out. Trump, of course, took wasted no time trying to slam Biden for it. And Biden, the Whelan family pretty much responded, said, shut up, Trump. You didn't do anything when you were in office. And when I said, as Paul Whelan's brother, who's a very gracious guy, I saw him interviewed on NPR, said Trump has talked more about my brother today than he did during his entire 4 years in office. So it's just it's tricky politics. They, of course, you'll go online and you'll see all kinds of inaccurate things about how Trump never traded prisoners for prisoners, never released anybody. It's not true. He did it all the time, just like all presidents do all the time. It's not uncommon to do. And let's also remember that Trump, in order to get this early pullout from Afghanistan, had pushed the Afghan government to release about 5,000 Taliban prisoners. Nobody likes to talk about that. It's just, or certainly Trump doesn't like to talk about it. But so you've got all this politics around, and well, it was an uneven trade. And, first of all, when you're quantifying the value of people in terms of what's even in trade, as if there's some kind of point system, it's ridiculous. But the one thing I'm not even seeing the quote unquote liberal press mention is the fact that this guy actually served more than half the sentences. We're talking about Bout, the arms dealer. Probably isn't going to. Who's going to want to do business with him anymore? It's not like he's a big secret. Everybody knows that they're going to be watching him like a hawk. So there aren't going to be any, certainly not any underground deals with him. And on top of it, having served, I think, 12, close to 13 years of sentence, he was actually up for good behavior in just a few years. So he was probably going to be released anyway, whereas Brittany Griner, if they had stayed true to their sentence, would have served the whole 9 years. I think in Russia there's an opportunity on good behavior to get out 1 year early or something like that. And she would have been in a labor camp and would not be very well off. She's been released. Her family is overjoyed. They're going to continue to work to get Paul Whelan released. There are other prisoners. I mean, we've had prisoner swaps. Anyway, there's a lot to talk about there, and we can pick some stuff. But I want you to join in at this point, Aaron. What do you got to say on the subject?
Well, just picking up where you left off, I think when we look at, the individual that we released, we're looking at a Russian oligarch who's been out of action for 12 years. And it's not like as soon as he goes back, things are going to change drastically. Like the corporations that he was working for to move weapons to the people that want to do harm to Americans and American interests, those continue to exist when you cut the head off of an oligarch. It's not like this guy was like the universal soldier out there himself doing all of the killing. He was a guy making phone calls and signing papers, and when that guy goes away, they get another guy to make phone calls and sign papers. And it's not like he's indispensable. It sounds like he's going into politics now when he gets back. Well,
right.
Good for him. I'm sure it's going to work out. They made a Hollywood movie out of him. The whole trade, to me, on the one hand, is like perfect Putin talking point. It's like he is going to take this opportunity to put Biden in a place that makes him look weak to conservatives at home. And boy, are they taking the bait for that. They are just jumping on Biden for this trade. And, he gets to basically make it look like he went 1-for-1 for this merchant of death. But everybody forgets that, like, Griner, people say that she doesn't believe in America. Well, she's got 2 Olympic gold medals that would say otherwise. She is a 6-time All-Star. She is a WNBA champion. She is 2-time Defensive Player of the Year. She was an NCAA champion. She was Rookie of the Year. I think people comparing her to LeBron James are probably making a bit of a reach because, in my opinion, he is the GOAT of basketball. But she is an all-star American basketball player. If her name was Tim Tebow and she was going to play football in Russia, it would be a very different conversation about this trade. If we're saying all-American football player, like, people would have a huge problem with the fact that he had, or in this case, she had medically prescribed materials that she brought with her apparently on accident and was charged with smuggling narcotics for 9 years. Like, come on, that is Russia putting its boot down to get something that it wants. Biden being put in an impossible situation just bites the PR bullet, goes to bat for someone that I consider to be an American hero, and lets a Russian oligarch go who's getting out a little bit later anyway. I do think Whelan is going to come. I think that trade is going to happen. I think that that's something that is probably going to happen at some point in the near future, but Putin just wanted to make this look one for one because
well, as our producer Matt has just pointed out, apparently what Putin is reportedly wants is there's an individual, a Russian, being held by the Germans. Somebody that Biden doesn't have direct control over. So basically, they want Biden to broker a deal of Whelan for this individual somehow, and so we'd have to give Germany something or something. Who knows? But,
I think it's worth pointing out that part of the coverage of this has played into, as the communication professor in the room, it's playing into really, really predictable anti-Black stereotypes when it comes to the ways that we police cannabis and cannabis use. The so-called war on drugs and the targeting of drug users is, as most people know, 70% nonviolent offenses. An overwhelming majority are cannabis related. Black folks are arrested at 4 times the rate of white people, even though they are just as likely to use cannabis, just as likely to have cannabis. The New York City stop and frisk data showed us that white people are more likely to be carrying cannabis and cannabis paraphernalia and less likely to face any kind of punishment for that. And I think that this kind of racist reaction is exactly the kind of brew that Putin tries to whip up. Like, that's what he's looking to stir in this country when it comes to inciting a very, very particular brand of white supremacy on the right. And it gave him a really perfect opportunity to do that. And I think that we're going to hear from her, and I think her story is going to be incredible. I think it's going to backfire spectacularly because she's very good at making her voice heard, and her story is yet to be told. But up until this point, it's been predictable and really, really depressing.
Yeah, and I just want to say that, when they say, well, maybe she'll learn to love her country instead of kneeling, that act of kneeling was because she loved her country. She wants it to be a better place. She is taking a chance of losing sponsors when she does that, just like other athletes had. That was an expression. Protest is part of the American tradition, at least for most of us, and that was a classic expression of being an American.
If your loyalty is to the flag over the freedom of speech and expression, you're no patriot in my book.
No, and it had nothing to do with it. It had nothing to do with disrespecting the flag. Everybody, always says that. It was actually just not participating in the pledge, for that moment to make a point about the fact that young Black men are being killed by police on a regular basis, higher proportionately than any other group, ethnic group in the country, and just making a point of that so that we think about it. And this is the
same things about Muhammad Ali, and to this day the man is an American hero, and I think that she's going to go down in the same book for the same reasons. And like I said, her story is yet to be told in terms of what happened, and I cannot wait to hear how she interprets this, because all of these histories are not lost on her, and I think that that's going to be a big part of how she explains what happened.
I'm sure there are publishers all over rushing to get that book deal.
Absolutely.
That's it, anyway, I'd say they make a movie, but who they can get to play her, you got to find a good actress who's 6'8".
You need exactly the right casting, that's for sure.
So I don't know, I guess you could use CGI or something, but but at any rate, this is a moment, right, which is really sad for American politics, because in the old days, actually, if this was 30, 40 years ago, there would have been cheering for this, that this happened, that, welcome home, an American person who was not technically innocent, but really innocent, I mean, it just, okay, so she actually had the stuff in her packet, and it's not an intentional crime or whatever, specific intent crime, but it was not something that should even lead to a jail sentence, even in a place like Russia. It's something that should have led to a fine, but brief detainment, go to court, judge yells at you, and you get fined. That's what happens, and and that's what would be appropriate, and that's what would help, for people to remember not to bring stuff like that. Oh, I'll check my bag more next time. It's supposed to be proportionate to that, but but the Russians saw her as an opportunity with the Ukraine war to basically hold something over, to maybe so that he could possibly get somebody he prefers, Putin, that is, to deal with in office in the next couple of years.
The research on medicinal cannabis is, in my opinion, fairly comprehensive and fairly consistent, especially when it comes to athletes, folks that deal with chronic joint pain, chronic muscle pain.
Oh, yeah.
Anybody at all that deals with concussions, and basketball is not a known concussion sport, but the amount of, banging of the head just in terms of running on a basketball court is pretty substantial. And I think in a world where, we have something that is known to be a meaningful form of medicine, so that it's prescribed by doctors all over the world, whether or not a country decides to criminalize this, really, in my opinion, becomes a technical question. And principally, at the end of the day, lots of things are going to be illegal, but the law itself is not going to have a whole lot of principled justification behind it. And I think this is a really good example, again, of where we saw someone like smuggling is the word that they used, a narcotic. They call it.
Like she's going to make a lot of money selling it. Right?
And that's playing on a very generic war on drugs vocabulary we have in this country that is capitalized on that exact same move. It's just very, very convenient and or very, very smart to frame cannabis as a smuggled narcotic when you're dealing with an American culture that views a so-called war on drugs as necessary to deal with, drug dealers and things.
And when you hear about the story, I mean, when she was on the plane, she went and got to had conversations with everybody. She wanted to make a personal connection with everybody, from the pilots to the staff and everything. Right. I mean, she was just so grateful. People have to. Well, they don't have to, I guess they don't have to, but understand that patriotism is expressed differently in different people. And, and for some people, patriotism expressed in how you treat other people. And by every account, she treats people around her wonderfully. I mean,
a long time ago, Al Franken said something that really stuck with me. And he talked about how there's two ways to love your country. You can love your country like a child loves their parents. My daddy is the strongest daddy. Nobody can beat up my daddy. How dare you say your daddy's better than my daddy? Or you can love a country like adults love each other. And what that means is when they're doing things that make you ashamed of them, that you're going to speak up. You're going to say, you are better than this. I believe in you. I expect more of you. And that, to me, is what grown-up love and commitment is all about. That is expensive. When she takes a knee during the national anthem or the pledge, like, she knows that she's going to become a target. And yet that is a stance that she takes because she believes so firmly in her advocacy, which I think is righteous. And that, to me, is what patriotism is all about. That's it.
Yeah. Now, meanwhile, releasing Bout, like I said, I don't think he's going to be selling arms anymore. He actually said he was going to enlist to go fight in Ukraine or some stupid thing.
He said he would enlist if he could, which is a very popular thing for people to say when they know for a fact they're never going to be at the front.
Right, it's just and he's got to kiss up to Putin. I mean, he obviously owes Putin, right. So whatever he's going to do. But he really, I mean, if you were somebody who smuggles guns and works on the black market for weapons, are you going to go deal with this guy? I mean, that'd be insane. They know that every intelligence agency in the world is watching him. Is going to be watching his every move. So what is he going to be able to do? I mean, it's
within Russia, these organizations are built like the mob, and the whole point of the mob is that you can take as many of our guys in as you want, and the organization is going to survive. And he's ancient. He's antiquated. He's been out of the game for way too long. He's definitely a liability from the standpoint of any kind of secrecy or anything is concerned. I think it makes a lot of sense he's going to become a politician, because that's
nobody is going to be, regardless of what Josh Hawley and the other idiot Republicans that have been chimed in on this say, he is not going to be resulting in somebody else's death. It's just, Anyway,
I mean, unless he runs for Congress from the state of Georgia
right.
or something, and
Right.
helps Marjorie Taylor Greene succeed the next time at the armed January 6th. That's possible. That's possible.
Anyway, we'll be hearing more about it. And you're right. I'm looking forward to hearing their story.
Yeah, for sure.
Okay, our third topic, inflation. Inflation, the increase rate of inflation is down. It only increased 0.1%. That was lower than expected. A lot of it based on the fact that the price of oil and gasoline have dropped significantly, partly due to increased production. Contrary to popular belief, Biden is apparently pumping more oil than Trump did. But opioids here. They closed the pipelines. The pipeline they closed hadn't even been opened yet, first of all. And second of all, it wasn't going to, it's not oil that's going to be sold here. It was the pipeline was supposed to go down to the Gulf so that it could be exported. But anyway, the price of gas has dropped. And that has led a lot of other things to drop. So it is that we're at 7.1% inflation or something like that. But this was the lowest increase all in a year. So there are still problems. Food is still a problem. That seems to be the big sticking one, is getting food. Supply chain issues, weather, a number of other things have had some impacts on food overall, and that's of course that affects everybody because we all have to buy food, right? So it's really that's a tough one, but it does appear to be coming under control. Whether or not it was due to the rate increases, the Fed rate increases, we don't know. We still don't know if the Fed rate increases are going to cause a recession next year. The effects tend to lag, and it's finally having its impact on inflation. But we still have strong jobs reports. And the Fed today, instead of upping it 0.75 of a point like it has for the past 2 or 3 times, it only upped it for 0.5, a half point, which sent the stock soaring, at least for a while. I don't know how they ended on the day, but earlier today, they were going really well after that, because there's a possibility that we may be able to pull out of this inflationary cycle and not have a recession, or at least not a really heavy duty one. So we don't know the fundamentals, but we don't know what's going to happen, and anything can turn things around. Railroad strike, for instance, might have had an impact, that type of a thing. But it does appear that inflation is starting to be tamed. They're expecting food to get under control as more of the supply chain happens and more of the crops come in. If that happens, there may only be one more rate hike increase. Still enough time to damage the economy, though, and there are a lot of economists who don't even believe they should be doing that. And among them, Elizabeth Warren, who's saying, you're going at it with a sledgehammer when really we need more finesse here. But what is the likelihood that we can actually avoid a very painful recession anyway?
Yeah, it's always interesting as a question to be like, is the house going to explode? Probably not, maybe not, but like in the question is a fairly dire circumstance. And anytime I'm, researching this question, and throughout the decades of intercollegiate speech and debate, we've teetered on many recessions and had to answer this question. One of the things that's always been very clear to me is that question really only comes up when we're in a situation that could break either way, and it's hard to tell. And I think that in the current circumstances, what's making it very difficult to answer that is, as you noted, that there's just real supply chain problems, and demand continues to grow, and that continues to drive prices up. And so while we have inflation easing, prices are not easing. And so it doesn't really make that big of a difference whether inflation slows down or not. One of the things I said earlier is the fire is spreading less quickly, but it's still really hot in here. As you mentioned, food costs is a big one. Housing costs is a big one.
Yes.
Transportation costs, the cost of a vehicle is really high. The cost to fly somewhere is really high. Booking a hotel and a rental car. And this might sound like basic vacation stuff to people, but in a lot of ways, that greases the wheels of small business. And we're seeing more people conducting that business online and things like that. But those increases in costs do not seem to be going down very quickly. No. And when we've got folks like Sinema saying $15 is too much to ask for minimum wage, the temperature really goes up. It makes it hard for Americans to feel like, it feels fairly academic to say whether we're in a recession or not, when most folks are just counting down the days until that stimulus package comes through to decide how big Christmas dinner is going to be.
Yep. Yeah, it's true. The impact. Now, the lowering of gasoline does actually affect almost every household.
$4.90 something here on the North Coast. I didn't think I'd see $4 gasoline again in my life, Eric, and there it is.
Yeah, it's happening. Well, I also think that part of that is with the electric happening. I think oil companies realize they may have blown it. By jacking up oil, and flexing their muscle on this, that the demand for electric cars is, through the roof. People, everybody wants them, but only a few states have the infrastructure for them.
That's key, I think, and it's really going to lag, especially in places like this, like rural places like this, setting up a power grid, like, in the Arcata Bottoms, let alone some of the other rural places here that can support everyone charging a car quickly. That's way more expensive than most people think.
Yeah, no, it's going to be, an issue. It's going to require a major. Now, we did pass the act that is going to lead to increasing in the infrastructure. We've got news that all of a sudden fusion is back as a possibility.
Fingers crossed every time. Fingers crossed for that one.
Yeah, well, cold fusion I think is kind of dead in the water, but this one, apparently, it's they're talking, and that's and it's less dangerous than classical fission nuclear power apparently, but
scale it up. Scale it up. All I'm saying is they got to scale it up.
Yeah, right. It's we have the wind power on the project that looks like it's moving forward. A couple lawsuits around that, but looks like it's moving forward finally in this county. So we have a lot of developments that are happening, and one of the things that is charging this is the fact that gasoline got so expensive that all of a sudden people took a second look at it. Yep. Now it's only 5% of the market right now, but that's actually kind of huge. I mean, when microbreweries got 5% of the beer market, ale market, whatever you want to call it, the big guys panicked and they started creating microbrew editions. Red Killian's Red, and I forget what other companies put out, but it's they
look great, and it says Anheuser-Busch right there on the side.
Right. Yeah, because 5%. That's 5% that you didn't have before.
Right.
And that's only going to get bigger. And apparently when people make a switch to either electric or hybrid, they tend to not go back. They like those low paying at the pump things. They like to not have to pay $50 to fill up a tank, right? Or however much. And so with that, the price of oil dropped. I think with this development of this conversion, and you're right, we've got to find a way to make the grid a lot more accessible to this, and the like. And but that's charged up an arms race within the EV industry. They are talking about alternatives to the lithium. They're talking about dual battery systems now they're developing, so you can double the length of the cars, and you've got also a strong union movement that is keeping wages up and increase for the first time. It may very well be that we don't have a mass layoffs. We do see companies laying off. The tech companies are laying people off, but that's a different, on a different level. But we are going to have to increase. We now have to start doing the chips in this country, because all of a sudden people realize, whoa, we're totally dependent on China for chips. That's a security issue, right? I mean, we just passed the 50-year anniversary of the transistor. The reason, we made it to the moon and Russia, Soviet Union never did, was because of transistors, right? I mean, and so and now with the microchip, I'm kind of babbling, but I'm thinking the fundamentals are so different here that maybe some of these old rules don't apply. Not to mention the fact that, I didn't have much faith in the Fed rate trying to bring inflation down, because the whole world was in inflation, in a state of inflation, because of the Supply Chain Institute. So it's almost like, me putting my heater on and heating up my house and thinking, hey, this is good. I'm going to heat up the whole city of Eureka, right? I mean, the Fed can't control what happens globally. So I actually think it was just a rote response that isn't having much to do with anything. But it is apparently taming certain types of things, and it may reverse inflation over the next couple of months. Who knows? Will it tailspin into a recession, though? I think the structure of the economy is so different now. I'm not sure a lot of those old rules really apply. We've got strong fundamentals. We're bringing back manufacturing for the first time in decades. We've got strong unions that are not going to put up with, too many layoffs. They got their contracts and the rest. And we've got the momentum still from coming out of the pandemic, that we're still got decent jobs reports, even after half a year of increased rates. So I think we anyway. I need to wanted to get that out, that I'm not sure that we're going to see a recession.
I think you're right that the old rules are really being tested. Joe Biden, famous Amtrak Joe there, signed a law that made it illegal for railroad workers to strike. That's business not as usual. Bernie Sanders voted for that law. That's business not as usual. And this, is sad for me as a union person, but at the same time, I want to echo what you're saying, which is that, you see people coming together, realizing that, railroad unions can destroy your economy if you don't respect them. If you don't give them the wages that they are due, if you don't give them sick days, we're going to be coming back to this and having this conversation again. And I think that that's really leading a lot of people to say, we got to reinvest. We got to reinvest in education. We're seeing it right here with the Cal Poly dollars going into the ground. I know people don't like
maybe also the Democrats will be a little more proactive and involved in the discussions next
time.
And
I think that you are seeing a lot of that really pivot in ways that help the economy. That said, in a globalized economy, one of the things I was reading said that if our economy continues to be strong and these supply chain bottlenecks continue, that's bad. You don't want a growing economy with supply chain bottlenecks, because that, again, is going to lead to just runaway inflation. And the only other thing I would say on the business as usual, kind of being transformed, is that Forbes and a bunch of other people are publishing articles about how volatility is probably just the new normal. The ways that we've measured recessions in the past and the ways that we've understood market and economic fluctuations in the age of late climate change, in the age of conflict like we're seeing in Ukraine and potentially in China, it's really difficult to say what is and isn't a recession. The fact that we're still pumping along post-COVID and Ukraine invasion asking, will there be a recession? I'm worried, because it sounds like the house could blow up, but at the same time, the house hasn't blown up yet. And that seems to suggest that, there's something going that is keeping it together. So that gives us a little bit of hope in here.
Yeah. Unfortunately, with Ukraine, I think part of what's doing it is we got to now spend money to replenish all those, missiles and things, which is really a
dollars
bummer.
being spent on arms right now are absolutely criminal. I think everyone can agree that Russia has to be stopped. There was all sorts of ways to do it, but in an age of so many people suffering, so many people without homes, so many people without basic health care and things, this country is just shedding billions on war, and it's depressing.
On the upside, I think they're probably going to slow down making tanks. I don't know that anybody wants to be in a tank after this war. I mean, it's just, it just seems like you're in a rolling coffin.
If you're not embedded with an incredible network of aerial defense and drone resist capabilities, you are absolutely in a rolling coffin. Yeah, that's what we're learning.
Yeah,
but that's true for bombers too. Like Russia's moving all their bombers to Siberia because a drone can show up from nowhere and turn that multi-billion-dollar bomber into a smoldering pile on your runway. That's not doing anything. So
and so what one economist was saying is that it's a lot cheaper to make these shoulder-held missiles than it is to make tanks. So that we may not have to spend as much money, but still. But that is part. We know that's going to happen. We know that that's going to be paid for no matter what, because that's spending that Republicans love. So at any rate,
I heard somebody compare the Javelin shoulder launch system to the AK-47, and there's a lot of AK-47s in the world, and I think there's going to be a lot of Javelins in the world. Yeah.
Yes, and Stingers and similar measure. I mean, it's like I wouldn't want to fly a plane either. Nobody's got. No. Nobody has air superiority in Ukraine right now. It just doesn't even exist. I mean, so you've got this going on, but we do have that deal too, and I think this is part of what might help. Where food is getting out of Ukraine, and it is making its way out of Ukraine, and that has put some ease on. And over the next couple months, that probably will take some of the pressure off of the food supplies, and but we are restructuring. We are going. We have countries have now made a decision that we're going to go to green, climate change addressing technologies, and that is stimulative by itself. That's going to maintain things. So anyway, a lot, very complex subject, hard to do in a third of a show here, but I'm sure we'll be discussing it more in the future. Well, this brings us to our end of the show predictions. Aaron, what do you have for us?
So there's a meme of Joe Biden walking around with sunglasses on, looking pretty cool, and it's because he's been around a long time and he knows how to do politics. I think Whelan's getting out. I already said it earlier in the show. He didn't get him this time because I think the Putin machine really wanted to tell a certain story about a one-for-one trade. But I think the Biden administration absolutely knows how big of a win it would be to bring that guy home with all the blowback that he's getting. And I think that they find a way to make a deal. That's my prediction. What do you got?
Well, what I have is I've been watching now what's been happening with the January 6th committee, and we'll be talking about this over the next few.
Cannot wait. So many. Sorry.
And so there are going to be some criminal referrals.
Yes.
As we know, there were 34 Republican congressmen in touch with Mark Meadows about trying to overthrow things, and including one who called for martial law, spelled MARSHALL. I mean, if you're going to do something like that, you should spell it right.
But like in any case, plan, but for law, what's going on?
Right. Anyway, I think there were only going to be 2 criminal referrals, though. I think one for Donald Trump and I think one for Eastman. I don't think Meadows or any of the other people or any people in Congress rise to that level. I think that there'll be ethics committee referrals for Jim Jordan and Mo Brooks and all of them that won't go anywhere because because the Republicans are about to take over the House. We're already seeing the bar discipline stuff happening. I actually think you need to add to the list, though, Rudy Giuliani, Sidney Power, Mitchell, Ellis, Bob. You need to add, though, I think there is going to be a referral from January 6th committee for Jeffrey Clark, the man that the environmental attorney that Trump wanted to install as Attorney General until everybody within the Department of Justice said they were going to mutiny and leave, and it didn't happen. That was going to be important. I believe he's going to be referred to for bar discipline, and I think but that's all going to happen soon. And then, of course, because we know that the committee's going to be shut down in a month. So, but that's where we're at. But just 2 criminal referrals, not as many as people thought. Nobody from Congress.
Not enough, but if Trump's on the list, I'm happy, and I think he's going to be on the list.
I think Eastman will too. All right. Well, that's all we have for this week. We'll be back next week. This type of news is supposed to be slowing down as we get close to Christmas. Not this time. Till next time, stay informed and stay engaged.